My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in a little town outside Nashville, Tennessee. I used to think my life was simple in the best way. Family dinners on Sundays, sweet tea on the porch, and music humming in the background like a second heartbeat. But if I'm being honest, most of that was nostalgia. The life I live now is not the one I pictured when I was younger, barefoot in the grass, clutching a secondhand guitar, dreaming of singing on big stages under blinding lights. Instead, I spend most of my days barefoot in the kitchen, just not in the way little Claire once imagined. Mark, my husband, says that's exactly where I belong. When people in town see us together, they think we're perfect. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with that confident, polished smile that makes women giggle and men slap his back. Mark knows how to play the part. He works at his father's auto dealership, drives a shiny black truck, and struts around like life bent itself to suit him. And me? I'm the quiet wife by his side, always smiling, always polished, always making sure I don't step one toe out of line. But here's the thing. That's not who I really am. I wasn't always the wife who nodded and kept her voice low. Before Mark, I was loud. I was stubborn. I had a laugh that filled every room and a voice that carried over the buzz of bar crowds when I sang. My daddy used to say I was born with steel in my spine and fire in my lungs. But somewhere along the way, maybe after years of being told I was too much, maybe after Mark's first disapproving glare, I tucked all that away. Mark had a way of making me feel like everything about me needed correcting. If I cooked dinner, he'd complain about how much salt I used. If I wore jeans, he'd arch his brow and remind me that real wives don't dress like cowgirls when they're not on a horse. If I hummed a song while washing dishes, he'd shake his head and say, "Don't you ever get tired of all that noise?" At first, I brushed it off. I told myself he was just traditional, that he wanted things a certain way. That maybe love meant compromise, even when it felt like suffocation. But little by little, piece by piece, I started to vanish. The Claire who once sang into hairbrushes in front of her bedroom mirror was gone. The Claire who used to sneak into smoky bars to play 3 chords for strangers was buried under casseroles, laundry piles, and the sharp sound of Mark's disappointment. I'd tell myself I was happy. I'd tell myself I was lucky. After all, Mark was a provider. He liked to remind me of that often. Other women would kill to have a husband like me, he'd say, leaning back in his recliner while I folded his socks. You don't have to lift a finger. Just keep my house in order and don't embarrass me, and you'll never want for anything. The words always felt like a collar tightening around my neck. I used to think maybe if I just tried harder, he'd soften. If I cooked better meals, if I kept the house spotless, if I wore the dresses he liked and stayed quiet when his friends came around, maybe then he'd look at me the way he looked at me when we first met. Back then, he chased me with flowers, kissed me under fireworks, told me my laugh was the prettiest sound he'd ever heard. But those days had disappeared like smoke, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of control. The moment I knew I was in trouble was the night he brought his buddies over for poker. I'd spent hours preparing, barbecue sliders, chips, cold beer, the whole spread. I came out carrying a tray, smiling like the perfect hostess. One of his friends, drunk and sloppy, whistled and said, "Mark, you sure trained her well." And Mark? He laughed. He didn't correct him. He didn't defend me. He just grinned and said, "I don't let her wear the pants, just the aprons." The room erupted in laughter, and I stood there, tray in hand, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face. That night, lying awake in bed while Mark snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt something crack deep inside me. Something that had been bending and bending for years finally gave way. I thought about that little girl I used to be, clutching her guitar, dreaming of stages. I thought about the woman I'd become, silenced and smothered. And I hated it. I hated him. I hated myself. But more than that, I felt this flicker, a tiny flame in my chest I thought had gone out years ago. It was anger, yes, but also something else. Something that whispered, "You don't have to live like this. You were meant for more." The next morning, I put on a pot of coffee and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. My hair was messy, my face pale, but I noticed the faintest spark in my eyes. a spark I hadn't seen in a long time. I realized then that Mark might have stripped me down, but he hadn't destroyed me. Not completely. There was still something left. And I decided I was going to find it again, even if it killed me. But before I go deeper into how it all started unraveling, let me pause here for a second. If this story so far hits you somewhere in the chest, if it reminds you of something you've lived through or someone you know, then I need you to do me a small favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the rest of this journey. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there listening. Because trust me, this story is only just beginning. My days always started the same. I'd wake up before Mark, shuffle barefoot into the kitchen, and start the coffee. I'd set out his favorite mug, the one with the faded University of Tennessee logo, because if it wasn't ready when he came downstairs, he'd sigh like I'd already ruined his whole day. I told myself it was routine, but in reality, it was submission, a ritual of keeping the peace. That morning, though, something shifted. As I stirred sugar into his coffee, my eyes landed on my boots in the corner by the back door. They were dusty, forgotten, but I swear they looked back at me. A reminder of another Claire. A Claire who used to stomp across stage floors, boots scuffed from dancing and long nights of playing music that poured out of her soul. I tucked the thought away as I heard his footsteps. Mark came down in his crisp work shirt, kissed my cheek without really looking at me, and grabbed the mug like it was his birthright. "Cream's a little heavy," he muttered, not a thank you in sight. I smiled thinly, but inside, my jaw locked tight. It was never enough. Later that day, I went into town to pick up groceries. The store was half empty, the air-conditioned hum filling the silence. I was checking items off my list when I spotted something tucked between the magazines by the checkout, a flyer for a local open mic night at a bar I used to know well. My heart kicked against my ribs. Friday night, 8 p.m. Guitars, voices, freedom. I slipped the flyer into my bag before anyone could see. When I got home, I tucked it inside a cookbook Mark never touched. Just seeing it there made my pulse quicken, like I was hiding treasure. That evening, while Mark and I sat down to dinner, pot roast, his favorite, I dared to hum under my breath. A tune I hadn't sung in years. He glanced up sharply. "What's that?" "Just a song stuck in my head," I said, my fork poised midair. He frowned. "You know how I feel about noise at the table. Can't you just sit quiet and enjoy your food?" Heat crawled up my neck. I nodded, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. But in my chest, the flame grew hotter. I waited until he was asleep that night, sprawled out with the TV remote still in his hand. I tiptoed into the closet, pulled out my old guitar case, and ran my hand across the worn leather. It smelled like dust and wood and memories. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The strings were old, out of tune, but when I strummed, even softly, the sound filled me up in a way I hadn't felt in years. I pressed my forehead against the wood and whispered, "I'm still here." The next day, the universe decided to shove me further. I was folding laundry when I noticed something in Mark's jeans pocket. A receipt. At first, I thought it was gas or a burger joint. But no, a jewelry store. Diamond earrings. Almost $900. And I knew immediately they weren't for me. My stomach twisted. My mind scrambled through memories, looking for proof. Late nights at work. Phone calls taken outside. That smug smile he wore some mornings. The truth pressed down hard. Mark wasn't just controlling me. He was betraying me. I sat there with the receipt crumpled in my hand, my breath shallow, feeling like my entire marriage had been built on sand. I wanted to confront him, scream, throw the paper in his face. But another part of me, colder, sharper, told me to wait. To watch. To plan. That night at dinner, I kept my face smooth as he chewed through steak and bragged about closing a sale at the dealership. I nodded and smiled like always, all while the receipt burned like fire in my apron pocket. After he fell asleep, I went back to the closet, pulled out my boots this time, and slipped them on. They were stiff, but when I stood, I felt taller, stronger, like maybe the girl I used to be hadn't been completely erased. Friday came, and with it, the open mic night. My heart thundered as I drove into town, Mark's truck keys jangling in my hand. I'd lied, said I was meeting a friend for coffee. He didn't question it. He never thought I had the courage to lie. The bar was dimly lit, filled with the smell of beer and wood smoke. My palms were slick as I signed up. When my name was called, I stepped onto that tiny stage, guitar in hand, boots planted firm. At first, my voice shook. But then I remembered the girl I was. The girl who sang like the world was hers. The girl who didn't apologize for taking up space. The notes poured out, raw and aching, and when I finished, the crowd erupted. People clapped, whistled, even stood. Tears pricked my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as Mark's wife. Not as the woman barefoot in the kitchen. As Claire. When I left, strangers patted my back, told me I had something special. One woman leaned in and said, "Don't you ever give that up." I drove home with the windows down, wind tangling my hair, heart soaring. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw the light in the living room still on, my stomach sank. Mark was awake. He sat in the recliner, beer in hand, eyes sharp. "Where have you been?" My throat dried. "Coffee with Lisa," I said, voice even. He stared at me for a long moment, then smirked. "Funny. Lisa called here looking for you." My chest clenched. I braced for his anger, but he only shook his head and chuckled bitterly. "You try to play me, Claire? Don't embarrass yourself." I wanted to scream that he was the one embarrassing us, sneaking around with some woman and buying her jewelry. But instead, I bit my tongue. Not because I was scared, because I was planning. That night, lying in the dark, I listened to him snore and thought about the audience clapping for me, the way their faces lit up. And I thought about the receipt in my nightstand drawer. His lies. His arrogance. It hit me then, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about control. About him clipping my wings so I'd never fly away and see how far I could go. But what he didn't know was this. The more he tried to cage me, the more I wanted to break free. And now that I'd tasted it again, the stage, the applause, I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. The next morning, I pulled on my boots, even though I was just making breakfast. Mark raised an eyebrow as he walked into the kitchen. "What's this? You going to a rodeo?" "No," I said calmly, flipping bacon. "Just felt like wearing them." He laughed like it was a joke, but inside me, something solidified. He could laugh. He could sneer. He could buy jewelry for whoever he wanted. But I had my voice back. And sooner or later, I'd make sure the whole damn world heard it. The thing about suspicion is it eats at you. It doesn't sit politely in the back of your mind. It gnaws and claws, demanding answers until you either find the truth or lose your sanity. After I found that receipt, I couldn't stop watching him. Every time Mark picked up his phone and turned away, every time he said he was working late, every time he showered a little too long, my gut twisted. I started noticing details I'd once brushed off. The faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine on his jacket. Lipstick smudged faintly on a napkin in his truck. A hotel key card in his briefcase, tucked between papers. He wasn't even careful anymore. Maybe he thought I was too stupid or too scared to question him. The anger inside me grew so hot it felt like it might burn me alive. But alongside it, something else stirred. A sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just his obedient little wife anymore. I was a woman waking up, and he had no idea. One Thursday evening, he said he was going to grab a drink with the guys after work. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and told him to have fun. As soon as his truck pulled out, I grabbed my keys and followed at a distance. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, my heart racing so fast it hurt. I knew exactly where he was headed. Not the dealership. Not the bar where he usually played poker. No. He drove across town to a motel I'd driven past 100 times, but never stepped into. Cheap, neon lights buzzing, curtains pulled tight on every room. I parked 2 lots over, pulse hammering. And there she was. A girl couldn't have been more than 24, maybe 25. Long blonde hair, too much makeup, wearing a skimpy little dress that clung like second skin. She leaned against her car, grinning when Mark pulled up. He stepped out, swagger in full effect, and kissed her like a starving man. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My vision blurred with rage. That was my husband. My husband who demanded I stay home, keep quiet, never embarrass him. My husband who told me my dreams were worthless while he crept around with the barroom Barbie. I wanted to storm across the lot, rip her hair out, scream in his face. But I didn't. I sat there, shaking, and let the fury etch itself into my bones. Because anger without strategy is just noise. And I'd been quiet too long. They went into the motel together, his hand on her lower back like I'd been erased from his memory. I stayed there for an hour, maybe more, until they came out again. Laughing. Carefree. Like their sin wasn't carving me open in the dark. When I finally drove home, I wasn't crying. My tears had dried up weeks ago. No, what filled me was something sharper. A promise to myself. He would regret this. Back at the house, I pulled out my journal, the one I'd hidden under the bed for years. Its pages were half filled with songs from the girl I used to be, dreams scrawled in messy handwriting. I flipped to a clean page and began to write. Not just lyrics. Not just anger. Plans. Every lie he told. Every detail I discovered. Every little manipulation. I wrote it all down, my pen digging grooves into the paper. If he wanted to live a double life, fine. But he'd forget who I was. He thought I was broken, but I was writing myself back together, one line at a time. The next week, I played it cool. Breakfast on the table. Smiles when he came home. Nods when he rambled about his day. Meanwhile, I started tucking away cash. Selling little things I didn't think he'd notice. Jewelry for my mother, old vinyl records, even some of his cufflinks he never wore. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A secret safety net. At night, while he snored, I sang into the dark. Quiet, low, so the walls wouldn't give me away. I sang about betrayal, about cages, about fire. I sang until the ache in my chest eased, until my voice cracked. My boots were by the bed now, not hidden. Every morning when I slipped them on, I felt steadier. Then came the night it all came crashing down. I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, he kept it glued to him. That night, he was in the shower, and temptation pulled me like a tide. My hands shook as I unlocked it. He wasn't smart enough to use a code I didn't know. There it was. Texts. Dozens. Pictures. Can't wait to see you again, baby. You looked so hot last night. I wish you were here instead of her. Her name was Emily. My stomach lurched, but I kept scrolling, absorbing every filthy detail. He told her he loved her. He told her she was his escape. He promised her jewelry, vacations, a future. A future without me. I dropped the phone back on the counter just as the shower shut off. My chest heaved, rage crawling through me like a wildfire. For a moment, I almost confronted him right there, dripping wet in a towel, his lies plain as day. But then I thought about the applause at the bar, the fire I'd felt with that guitar in my hands. And I realized if I confronted him now, it would end with shouting, maybe worse. He'd twist it until I doubted myself again. No, I wouldn't give him that. I'd give him something he'd never forget. So I smiled when he walked into the kitchen, kissed his damp cheek like nothing was wrong. And as he poured a drink, rambling about how work was exhausting, I studied him the way you study a snake in the grass, calm on the outside, but coiled tight inside. That night, when he fell asleep, I went outside barefoot, boots in my hand, and stood under the stars. The cool air hit my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I slid my boots on and whispered to the dark, "You don't owe me any more, Mark. You don't get to write my story." I didn't sleep a wink. I lay awake, planning, heart pounding. Every betrayal fueled me. Every memory of his laughter at my expense sharpened me. By dawn, I knew this. The man who wanted me barefoot in the kitchen was about to watch me rise in the very boots he mocked. And when I was done, the only thing he'd have left was regret. Because I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to destroy the cage he built for me while he watched. When you've spent years living small, the act of taking up space feels almost sinful. That's how it felt the next Friday, when I walked into the Rusty Nail with my guitar slung across my back and my boots clicking on the floor. My heart was thundering, my palms slick, but I kept moving. People turned, some curious, some indifferent. Nobody knew me. Not really. Not the real me. And that was a gift. The air smelled like beer and fried food. Laughter rose in bursts from crowded tables, and the stage in the corner glowed under dim yellow lights. I'd been here before, years ago, back when I was still the Claire who believed she could be somebody. I remembered the way my hands used to shake before stepping up, and the rush that followed when I let the music pour out. Tonight, I was chasing that rush again. When the host called my name, I swallowed hard and walked up. My guitar strap dug into my shoulder, grounding me. I tapped the mic, adjusted it, and looked out at the sea of faces. For a second, doubt screamed at me. What if I made a fool of myself? What if I froze? What if Mark found out? Then I thought of him at that motel with Emily, laughing while I sat home folding his shirts. And just like that, the fear burned away. I strummed the first chord. My voice cracked on the first line, but I kept going. And then something shifted. My voice grew stronger, steadier, as if it remembered what my heart had tried to forget. The crowd quieted. A couple near the bar turned their heads. By the second verse, the whole room was listening. I sang a song I'd written years ago, about a girl who wanted more than the small life she'd been handed. The words felt heavier now, weighted with everything I'd been through. By the time I hit the chorus, my chest was wide open, raw and unapologetic. When the last note faded, there was a beat of silence before the applause came. It started small, then swelled, echoing in my bones. Some people stood. Strangers whistled. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. I left the stage with tears burning in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from recognition. The world hadn't forgotten me. I had just forgotten myself. A woman stopped me on my way to the bar. She had kind eyes and rough hands, probably from years of hard work. "Honey," she said, gripping my arm, "don't you ever stop singing. You've got something special." Her words sank deep, settling in a place Mark had tried to bury. I drove home that night with the windows down, hair whipping in the wind, adrenaline still surging. Every mile between me and that bar felt like a bridge I'd crossed, leaving the old Claire behind. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked darker than usual. Mark was already asleep, or pretending to be. I slipped inside, tucked my guitar under the bed, and stood in front of the mirror. My boots were scuffed, my eyeliner smudged, but for the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back at me. The next morning, I half expected him to notice something different, to sense it, but he didn't. He sat at the table scrolling on his phone, sipping the coffee I'd made, barely glancing up. His ignorance was a shield I could use. I kept going back. Friday nights became my secret rebellion. Each performance, I grew bolder, more alive. The regulars started recognizing me, nodding when I walked in, asking when I'd sing again. My name was scrawled on more than one napkin with the word amazing written beside it. I didn't tell a soul at home. Not yet. But the double life gave me oxygen. By day, I played the quiet wife. By night, I stepped into my boots and became the woman he couldn't kill off. But secrets are heavy things, and eventually they leak. One night, after a show that ended with a standing ovation, I walked off stage to find a man waiting for me. He was older, with graying hair and a worn leather jacket. He introduced himself as Tony, a local musician who'd been around the circuit for decades. "You've got a voice that cuts through noise," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You ever think about recording? Getting serious?" My throat tightened. "I used to," I admitted. "Well, you should again. Call me." He pressed a card into my hand before walking off. I stared at it all night, the possibility burning a hole in my chest. The thought of it thrilled me, but it terrified me too, because stepping into that world meant stepping out of Mark's shadow completely. It meant war. That weekend, I slipped the card into my journal, right beside the notes I'd written about Mark's affair. My music and my revenge sat side by side, waiting. Mark, of course, kept digging his own grave without realizing it. Sunday afternoon, he announced he was working late again. I nodded, kissed his cheek, and watched him drive off. This time, I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I already knew. Instead, I pulled out my guitar and wrote. The words spilled out like poison turned to honey. Lyrics about liars, about cages, about a woman finding her strength in boots he'd once mocked. Each line was a blade, sharp and true. When I sang it at the Rusty Nail the next week, the crowd erupted like nothing I'd ever felt. People shouted, clapped, even cried. My pain had become their anthem. And in that moment, I knew I had something Mark could never take away. But I also knew it couldn't stay hidden forever. One night, as I came home late, I found him sitting in the dark, beer bottle dangling from his hand. The room smelled of stale smoke and bitterness. "Where you been?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. My heart skipped, but I forced my face to stay calm. "Out with Lisa," I lied smoothly. He studied me, his eyes narrowed. For a moment I thought he knew, but then he snorted and leaned back. "You and Lisa sure been thick as thieves lately." I smiled faintly and walked past him, every muscle tight. Upstairs, I locked the bathroom door and pressed my back against it, breathing hard. He was suspicious now. The clock was ticking. I looked at myself in the mirror, boots still on my feet, and whispered, "Not much longer. He won't own you much longer." The following week, I called Tony. My hands shook as I dialed, but when he picked up, his voice was steady and kind. "Claire, I was hoping you'd call." We met at a small recording studio on the edge of town. Walking in felt surreal, like stepping into the life I'd left behind years ago. Microphones, soundboards, guitars lining the walls. My pulse raced, but when I sang, the nerves melted away. The producer leaned forward, nodding, his eyes lighting up. "You've got raw gold in your voice," he said. "We can polish it, but don't lose that edge. That's what makes people listen." By the time I left, I had a demo in hand and fire in my veins. Driving home, I knew I couldn't keep balancing the two lives forever. Mark's leash was slipping, and sooner or later, he'd try to yank it back. But I also knew this. The world had heard me now. And once you've been heard, you can't go back to silence. When I walked through the door, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at me with that same sharp look. He opened his mouth to ask where I'd been. I slipped past him, boots clicking against the tile, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Because I had a secret he couldn't touch. And when the time came, I would use it to burn his whole world down. The night Mark found out about my singing was the night everything inside me snapped. I had just come home from rehearsal, my boots still dusty from the wooden floor of the bar where the band and I had practiced. My voice was raw, my heart alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The house was dark when I stepped inside, but I could feel the tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mark was sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the lamp beside him. His jaw was tight, his hand curled around a glass of bourbon. "Where the hell were you?" His voice cut the silence like a knife. I swallowed hard, my bag sliding off my shoulder. "I told you, I had errands. Don't lie to me, Claire." He slammed the glass down on the table, bourbon sloshing over the rim. "I heard all about your little stunt, singing at Hank's bar, parading around like some washed-up wannabe." My stomach clenched. "Who told you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is you making a fool out of me." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think people don't talk? You think I don't hear the whispers?" Mark Whitmore's wife shaking her ass in a bar, pretending she's 20 years old. That's what people are saying. I felt my blood heat under my skin, anger sparking through the fear. I wasn't shaking anything, Mark. I was singing. Something I used to love before you shoved me into a box. His lip curled, that familiar sneer he wore whenever he wanted to remind me of my place. "I didn't shove you anywhere. I gave you a life, a house, security. And this is how you repay me? By embarrassing me in front of this whole town." The old Claire would have shrunk back, apologized, begged him not to be mad. But I wasn't her anymore. Not after writing songs in the dark. Not after standing on a stage and watching strangers connect with my words. "I'm not here to make you look good, Mark," I said, my voice shaking but steadying as the words left my lips. "I'm here to live my life. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem." His face twisted, and he stood so quickly the chair legs screeched against the floor. "You ungrateful bitch." For a moment, I thought he might hit me. His hand flexed at his side, and his whole body trembled with rage. But then he took a step back, as if even he knew crossing that line would be the end. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You want to play this game? Fine. But you won't win. I'll drag your name through the mud so fast no one will even want to hear you sing." Something inside me broke free right then, something that had been waiting too long to speak. I took a step toward him, my boots striking the hardwood with sharp certainty. "You've already dragged me through the mud, Mark. Every day you told me I wasn't enough, every time you tried to shrink me so you could feel bigger. But I'm done. You hear me? Done." His eyes widened just slightly, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. I pushed past him and went upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel his stare burning into my back, but I didn't stop. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every nerve buzzing. I knew things would never go back to how they were. Mark had seen a glimpse of the new me, and he wasn't going to let it slide. But the thought of backing down, of returning to that empty shell of a woman who lived only to keep him comfortable, made me sick. I'd rather face his wrath than lose myself again. The next few days were hell. Mark barely spoke to me, but when he did, it was sharp, cutting remarks designed to wound. He left his mistress's perfume lingering on his shirt like a taunt. He made calls in the other room, laughing loudly, making sure I heard. It was his way of reminding me he still had control. But here's the thing, his grip was slipping. Every insult, every cold shoulder only pushed me further away. And every night I sang, the fire inside me burned hotter. The breaking point came the night of our confrontation at Hank's bar. I'd been invited to perform with the band again, a Friday night show with a packed house. The air smelled like beer and fried food, neon lights buzzing above the chatter of the crowd. My hands trembled as I held the microphone, but when the first notes of the guitar filled the room, the nerves melted into pure adrenaline. I sang like my life depended on it. Every lyric bled with my pain. Every note carried the weight of years of silence. People clapped, cheered, whistled. Some even cried. It felt like breathing for the first time. And then I saw him, Mark, standing at the back of the bar, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. My stomach dropped, but I kept singing. If he wanted to intimidate me, he picked the wrong stage. When the set ended, I barely had time to put down the mic before he stormed through the crowd, grabbing my arms so hard it made me wince. "We're leaving. Now." The band members stepped forward, but I shook my head. "It's fine," I whispered. Outside, under the flickering street lamp, he let me have it. His voice was a hiss, sharp enough to cut. "Do you have any idea how pathetic you looked up there? People were laughing at you, Claire. Laughing. And you're too desperate for attention to even see it." I yanked my arm free, the pain of his grip throbbing under my skin. No one was laughing. They were listening. Something you've never done. He barked a humorless laugh. "Listening? To what? Your sad little songs about how mean old Mark doesn't love you enough? You think that's talent? That's therapy, not music." The words stung, but I refused to let him see. Maybe it's both. And maybe people need to hear it. Because I'm not the only one stuck in a marriage where the man treats his wife like property. His face reddened, his composure cracking. "Don't you dare talk about our marriage to strangers. You're mine, Claire. Mine. And I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of ungrateful, delusional woman you really are." That was it. The line in the sand. I took a deep breath, my boots planted firmly on the ground. "I'm not yours, Mark. Not anymore. And if you want a war, fine. But you better be ready, because I'm not backing down this time." For a moment, we just stared at each other. the night thick with all the years of resentment, betrayal, and hurt. Then he turned and stalked off, his shoulders stiff with rage. I stood there under the street lamp, shaking, tears threatening to fall. But beneath the fear was something stronger, resolve. He could threaten, he could smear my name, he could try to break me, but he couldn't unmake the woman I was becoming. That night, when I got home, I packed a bag. Just enough to get me through a few days. I didn't leave, not yet, but I needed to be ready. Ready for whatever storm Mark planned to unleash. Because one thing was certain, this fight wasn't over. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to fight. The festival felt like another world compared to the smoky, dim barrooms I had grown used to. Rows of tents lined the fairgrounds, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and kettle corn. The main stage rose high at the center, lights strung across it like stars waiting to burn to life. I stood behind the curtain with my guitar strapped over my shoulder, my hands sweating so bad I had to keep wiping them on my jeans. This wasn't just another open mic or a half-hour slot at Hank's Bar. This was the Southern Ridge Music Festival, the kind of event people traveled across state lines for. The crowd stretched so far I couldn't see where it ended, just a sea of faces, lawn chairs, and cowboy hats under the early evening sky. "Claire, you ready?" The drummer, Ryan, gave me a reassuring smile, tapping his sticks together nervously. "As I'll ever be," I said, though my stomach felt like it was doing backflips. The band had been buzzing for weeks about this gig, and I knew what it meant. Exposure. Opportunity. A chance to be seen by people who mattered, who could take us somewhere. But for me, it was more than that. This was my line in the sand. My declaration. If I could stand on that stage and sing my truth in front of thousands, there would be no going back to the silent woman in Mark's shadow. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer that my voice wouldn't crack, that my courage wouldn't falter. Then I heard it. His voice. "Break a leg, sweetheart. Don't embarrass yourself too much." I spun around, and there he was. Mark. Standing just a few feet away, wearing that smug, poisonous grin that had haunted me for years. My throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he drawled. "My wife up there, pretending she's some kind of star? That's comedy worth the ticket. You don't belong here." "Neither do you," he shot back, leaning in close so only I could hear. "But go on. Play your little songs. Because when it's done, I'm going to make sure every sponsor, every organizer here knows exactly who you are. A washed-up housewife chasing attention because her husband wouldn't touch her anymore." His words hit like bullets, but I refused to let him see the blood. I straightened my shoulders, staring him down. "Do what you want, Mark. You can't stop me." He smirked. "We'll see." Before I could respond, the stage manager waved us forward. The roar of the crowd swelled, and my heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. The band moved into position, and I forced myself to follow. The lights hit me first, hot, blinding, making it hard to see anything but the silhouettes of the audience. I gripped the microphone, my fingers trembling. For a second, panic clawed at me. I could hear Mark's voice in my head, mocking, belittling, telling me I didn't belong here. But then Ryan counted us in, the guitar chords rang out, and something inside me shifted. I opened my mouth, and the first verse poured out, not just words, but pieces of me I had buried for too long. My fear, my anger, my longing for freedom. It was all there, raw and unpolished, spilling into the night. The crowd grew quiet, leaning in. They weren't laughing. They were listening. By the second chorus, my voice had steadied, growing stronger with every note. I saw faces lit up with recognition, people swaying, tears glinting in strangers' eyes. And in that moment I knew, this was where I belonged. Not in Mark's kitchen. Not under his thumb. Here, on this stage. When the final song ended, the roar that erupted was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Applause crashed over me like a wave, chants rising from the crowd. My chest ached with emotion, tears threatening to spill as I clutched the microphone. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. Thank you for letting me share this with you. We walked off stage and my legs nearly gave out. Ryan clapped me on the back, grinning from ear to ear. You killed it, Claire. Did you hear them? They loved you. But the moment of joy was cut short when I saw Mark waiting by the exit, his smile cold and sharp. Cue performance, he said. But don't get too comfortable. Word travels fast, and I've got plenty to say. I clenched my fists, rage burning through my veins. You can't touch this. Not anymore. Oh, honey, he sneered. You think a standing ovation makes you untouchable? I know people here. Organizers. Sponsors. I've already had a few conversations. Let's just say the story of Claire Whitmore, the desperate, unstable wife who's using music to air her dirty laundry, won't play well in the press. For a second, the air left my lungs. The victory I'd just tasted threatened to slip through my fingers. But then I remembered the faces in the crowd, the way they leaned in, the way they felt my words. That was real. No smear campaign could erase that. You can spread whatever lies you want, I said, my voice steady. But the truth's louder. And tonight they heard it. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt. I walked past him, my boots striking the ground with purpose. Each step felt like a declaration. I was no longer the woman he controlled. I was no longer afraid of his threats. Backstage, people swarmed me. Strangers, fans, even a few festival organizers shook my hand, praising the rawness of my performance. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat grabbed me by the shoulders. You've got something, darling. Something real. Don't let anyone dim that. Tears stung my eyes as I thanked her, my chest swelling with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just somebody's wife. I was me. Later that night, I sat alone in my car, staring at the dark sky above the fairgrounds. The noise of the festival still echoed faintly in the distance, but inside, there was a quiet clarity. I thought about the years I'd spent bending myself into shapes to please a man who only wanted me small. I thought about the bruises his words had left, the lies he told, the affair he paraded in front of me. And then I thought about the stage, the music, the crowd's roar. The way it felt to finally stand tall in my own skin. Mark was right about one thing. Word travels fast. But so does truth. And after tonight, I knew I wasn't just surviving. I was rising. The war wasn't over. He'd come at me harder, I had no doubt. But now, I had something he couldn't touch. My voice. My boots. My fire. And I was just getting started. The world has a way of sharpening around you when the stakes get real. After the festival, I knew Mark would try to strike back. Men like him don't surrender gracefully. They twist and claw until they think they've torn everything loose. What I didn't know was how ugly he'd make it, or how loudly the world would answer when I refused to be silent. It started small. Rumors seated at the dealership, hushed comments in grocery store aisles. A cousin who'd never liked me before smiled too wide and said, "People talk, Claire." I felt the old tug of panic, the urge to hide. But then I remembered something the woman in the wide-brimmed hat had said backstage. Don't let anyone dim that. So I kept living loud. Mark escalated faster than I expected. He called a local blogger he knew, a man who fished for gossip like it was bait. He texted sponsors, hinted at scandalous behavior, and suggested I was unstable, that I might be a liability if anyone wanted to work with me. He even showed up at the Rusty Nail and demanded to speak with the owner. Your place is turning into a circus, he told him, all charm and teeth. The owner shrugged. She brings people in, he said. She sells drinks. That's business. But the uglier part was what Mark tried to do to my private life. He filed for temporary restraining things that never were, claims that I'd been erratic, that I had strained the marriage to the point of volatility. It felt like a hand trying to pull me back into the dark. For a minute, the paperwork, the legal notices, the whispers around town threatened to suffocate me. I had to breathe through it. I had to be smarter than a man who'd always assumed his money and menacing tone would buy him a clean slate. Here's where the world surprised me. People don't always believe the loudest voice. Sometimes they believe the true one. A friend from the studio, Jess, tough, practical, the kind of woman who knows how to hold her own, started filming my shows on her phone. "People need to see you," she said. She posted clips, raw and unglamorous, me strumming under yellow lights, my voice rough and honest, me laughing with the band after a set, me standing in the parking lot staring at the stars and putting my boots back on. The clips were simple, not polished. They were real. And real travels faster than fabricated whispers. One of Jess's videos hit a nerve. It was a minute-long clip of me singing the chorus of a song I'd written about being silenced, about boots finding the stage. There was a line in the chorus that always made my throat catch. "You said I'd be barefoot, but my boots learned the steps." Jess uploaded it without fanfare, captioned it with a single sentence. "This voice, just wait." Within hours, it spread. Strangers shared it. A few local radio hosts picked it up. Someone cut the clip into a short for a national music account, 100,000 views in a day. Then another account reposted it. People started commenting, tagging friends, writing messages like, "My mom would have loved this, and this hits home." Women shared stories about being smalled by husbands, by bosses, by systems. Men who'd felt like imposters in their marriages posted, apologizing in public for having been blind. Mark tried to smother it. He called Jess, begged, threatened. She laughed and told him to get lost. He called the festival organizers and demanded they take down footage. They didn't. He posted his own video, a clipped, polite-sounding statement about privacy and the sanctity of marriage. It read like a defense meant to divert. But the internet has a memory and an appetite for truth. People dug up photos of him with Emily, receipts, the motel key card I'd found. Someone recognized the ring he'd been wearing in a photo and sent it to me. The evidence had a weight no rumor could hold against it. When the first major station reached out for an interview, I froze. My hands shook when I answered the producer's call. "They want to hear your side," Jess said. "They want the truth." For a moment, I imagined Mark twisting every word, the lawyers spinning stories into shadows. For a moment, old fear crept in. But the thought of sitting mute while he rewrote everything I'd lived through felt worse than any public humiliation. So I said yes. Sitting under those hot studio lights, I breathed. I talked. I told the story the way it had cut into me. How I'd been told to shrink, how I'd hidden in the kitchen, how Mark had bought a life for himself while buying lies for another woman. I didn't cry on camera. I saved the tears for the car afterward, but I spoke steady. I spoke the truth. People heard me. The backlash came like rain. Some of it was predictable. Angry men defending Mark, old school neighbors muttering about marriage sanctity. Someone doxed the motel clerk who'd given me the key card by accident. But far more of it was support. Messages poured in. Women thanking me for speaking up, men saying they were ashamed they hadn't seen. A small coalition of local musicians reached out offering to back my shows and help get me to more festivals. An independent label in Nashville asked to talk. My inbox was full of offers, but also of people saying, simply, "We believe you." Mark's world started to tilt. The dealership, his family's legacy, took notice when a regional paper ran a piece about public scandal among local business families. Sponsors he'd leaned on grew nervous. The auto dealers around town, men who drank at the same tables and made the same jokes, started acting like they were walking on ice. Mark tried to hold steady in public. He wore that forced grin at the dealership, signed papers, shook hands. Privately, he was desperate. The arrogance he'd used as a shield began to crack. He called his brother, then his father. He yelled at them on the phone. I heard him lock himself in his office for hours, the muffled roar of fury seeping through the walls. Rumors turned into tangible consequences. The local community, once so willing to look the other way, started to choose sides. The hairdresser who'd always cut Mark's hair refused to take his appointment. A major festival sponsor that had once flirted with hiring him pulled support. My name was on posters. His name started to be background noise. But the real moment came without all the noise. It was ordinary and quiet, and that's what made it so cruel for him. I was playing a Sunday afternoon set at a small venue downtown when Mark walked in. He looked like someone trying to act normal at a funeral, his jacket too tight, face too white. He took a seat near the back, trying his best to shrink into masculinity. I felt the blood in my ears, heard my heart, but I kept singing. During the break, a woman in the crowd stood up. She lifted her phone and played a voicemail from someone at the dealership. It was a perfunctory voice, businesslike, telling Mark he was being removed from the board pending an internal review. The room fell silent for a beat too long. You could hear the weight of his name lifting, the way an animal notices the change in weather. He looked around, the color draining from his face. He had friends who avoided his eyes. For a man who'd always measured himself by the reflections in other people's faces, the absence of respect was worse than any public smear. He left soon after, shoulders hunched, walking like a man who had to rebuild something he'd never learned to make properly. I watched him go and felt nothing like triumph. The thing about revenge is, it doesn't always land like you imagine. When you see the person who hurt you stumble, there's a hollow. But then the hollow fills with something else. Relief. Freedom. A quiet satisfaction that you chose a life instead of bitterness. Word spread faster than any of us planned. A local reporter ran a piece about the power of music to heal and how my songs had connected a town. A national platform contacted me for a feature. The label in Nashville invited me to a meeting. People I'd never met wanted to book me. Opportunities opened like doors I'd forgotten existed. And yet, all those offers were surreal compared to a single small moment. One afternoon, I walked down Main Street to the bakery for pie. I passed the auto dealership, Mark's billboard still up, his smiling face plastered across it like a promise that had gone stale. He was sweeping the lot, a pale figure in the sun, trying to act like the man the town expected him to be.
He looked up when I walked by.
For a heartbeat, our eyes met.
He tried to say something.
I heard him clear his throat, the same old posture. But I kept walking. I didn't look away. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a scene. I simply kept going, boots steady against the sidewalk, head high. People nodded as I passed. A neighbor waved. A kid on a bike shouted, "You're awesome," and the sound landed in me like sunlight. That was the final proof, the tiny miracle. My life was not his to ruin. He could try, with lawyer letters and whispers and bruised pride. He could lose what he had. He could smear me, but he could not take my voice. He could not undo the way the world had heard me, had leaned in, had decided my story mattered. In the months that followed, my life rearranged itself in ways I'd only dared whisper in the dark. I played rooms that paid me. I recorded songs that felt like funerals and births at the same time. The label offered a modest contract, enough to get me into a proper studio and a step closer to the life I'd imagined as a kid who sang into hairbrushes. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town with sunlight in the kitchen and a porch I could sit on with coffee and breathe. Mark's face appeared less and less in my days. He sold the truck. He started going to anger management classes, or at least that's what the rumors said. I heard he lost more than just status. I heard he lost himself. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was punishment. I wasn't sure I cared to define it. What I cared about was that I'd chosen myself. On the night I signed the first record deal, we celebrated with the band at a little diner. I wore my boots, the pair that had been scuffed for 1,000 steps. We laughed until our sides hurt. The waitress brought us a round of pie on the house. Outside, the neon sign buzzed softly, and for a second the world felt perfectly aligned. When I think back to the kitchen where I'd once stood with flour on my hands and silence in my chest, I feel a tenderness for that woman who'd bent so much to keep the peace. She taught me patience. She taught me endurance. But she also showed me what I had to lose if I stayed small. Now, my boots are worn more on purpose than by accident. They carry me to stages and meetings and hotel rooms that smell like potential. Sometimes I still hear Mark's voice in the back of my head, sharp, small, but it's further away. Mostly, I hear the roar of a crowd, the hum of a microphone, and my own voice, steady and clear. I wake up some mornings and pinch myself, but mostly I don't need proof. I feel it in my bones. I used to think revenge was about making him pay. I thought I wanted him to suffer for what he did. What I didn't know then was that real revenge is different. Real revenge is living fully. It's standing in your boots on a stage and refusing to be erased. It's letting the light find the parts of you he tried to hide. When I walk past the dealership now, sometimes I glance at the empty billboard where his face used to be. The letters are faded. People move through life. Businesses change hands. Scars change shape. But I keep walking. Boots on, head up, a song in my pocket. The stage is waiting. If you've been with me through Claire's journey, every betrayal, every tear, every note sung from the heart, then you know this story is more than revenge. It's about reclaiming power. If it touched you, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next story. And don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know.